Dear, oh dear, oh dear. A PR disaster for West Ham and David Moyes, in my opinion. I don't know whether you've seen it already. He dropped a podcast, strange timing, on the Diary of a CEO podcast, which is a fantastic podcast. I'm going to leave a link in the description down below because I'm sure you're going to be wanting to watch this podcast. But it's an hour and a half in-depth podcast with David Moyes. A lot of it, I must say this, is concentrated on his time at Manchester United. I've listened to the whole thing, an hour and a half. He did drop a few bombshells, and one in particular that I don't think is making him look great, to be quite honest with you. And listen, I've got some thoughts. I'll be playing a clip of the video at the end, so you can tell me what you think. But he did touch on a few things that we could pick up on. His goal, he thinks, in terms of West Ham's goals, he thinks the last 2 years have been a success, which is not too difficult to argue with, although we haven't won a trophy, which, you know, I suppose it deems to be, it's down to the person's personal opinion about what deems to be success. But I wouldn't argue that it's been a success in the last 2 years in terms of what we're used to. He also goes on and talks about his lack of medals. He's never won a medal as a manager, of course, and he just turned around and said that he does think it's a success, but not everyone can have a medal in the industry. Not everyone can have success. He wants to build a new West Ham, which is one that I picked up on. I must say this before I go on. The podcast, it seems to be filmed last week, because the host mentioned that we were 16th in the table, so that would have been just before the Wolves game, I believe. Longevity, being given time, is a huge thing in football. That he's driving still to get a medal. He hasn't got much time left. He's not going to be going into management as long as Sir Alex Ferguson and Roy Hodgson. So he's 59 now, he mentions in the podcast. And he will not be managing in his 70s. He goes on to mention that he won't have many opportunities if this one gets slipped away from him. And I think the biggest bombshell, and I'll play the clip right here, is that he passed up the chance to buy Alvarez, who's just played for Argentina in the World Cup, who just signed for Manchester City in the summer, about a year ago, because Mikel Antonio was playing well. At the time, I believe we were sitting fourth in the table. We were screaming out for a striker, and all of a sudden, he decides to drop this bombshell. Let's have a little listen to what he says here.
I would not ask you to name your worst signing, but where have you frequently got it wrong when signing players?
No, what I think you do is I think it's the ones I've missed. The ones who you've said, nah, I don't think he's quite good enough. Don't think I want it. And I've had hundreds of them.
Who's the one you missed the most there?
Well, just recently, because we've been talking about it. You know, we've been Alvarez, who's just played for Argentina in the World Cup. You know, I brought in a new scout who says, look, you should go for Alvarez at River Plate. And I watched him. He's a very good, really good technician. I thought he done so many good things as a centre forward, but I thought maybe not quite the one we want. Maybe didn't quite. We had Mickey Antonio, who had been doing very well. I thought, I don't know if he's... And you see, sometimes the players change in 6 months. But I have to say, there's other players like that who you don't take and don't go on to be a real success. But that one at the moment is just one, because it was probably only a year ago where I decided, nah, I don't think it's probably the one we're going to take.
Okay, so that is a clip of the interview. Look, make your own minds up. I'm going to give you my opinion on it. You tell me what you think. I've got a couple of issues. And look, I'm not just going to go anti-Moyes brigade. You know, it was a good interview, hour and a half, honest. You know, you can't knock the geezer for being honest. And we do obviously bang on about honesty in football and the lack of it. And, you know, but he goes on to say a few things, actually. He goes on to say he's been told... you know, by a certain chairman to buy players, you know, when he's talking about buying players. And he also said a lot of the player recommendations come from agents now, which, you know, it's been speculative at best over the last few years about who recommends these players, and he confirms it's a lot of agents. He also says he has a lot of control over the transfers, and that he works the way he buys his players, which this is not going to do him any favours. And the most baffling thing about this interview is that it comes. I would love to have listened to this interview last year, but at the moment, where we sit now, I don't want our manager, who is, feeling couldn't be worse for David Moyes at the moment, and I do feel for him. But what is he doing 1.5-hour interviews? And the most baffling thing for me is not the fact that he's done the interview. He's done that interview, but I know through personal experience that West Ham would have to pass this interview. This come out today. By the way, we are in the relegation zone, just lost to a relegation rival on the eve of a massive, massive game. And they've allowed this podcast to go out on this channel. As I said, very good podcast. I would have loved to have heard this interview last year. I don't want to be hearing this interview on the week of a game where it's make or break for West Ham. This could make or break our season. We're halfway through the season. We're in the relegation zone. We've got 15 points. Everybody's calling for him to be sacked, and he decides that this is the best time to drop a podcast. Disaster. And whoever, I think silly of him to take the interview. Probably thinking in his brain that he don't believe that West Ham are in trouble. He don't believe that there is a threat of us being relegated. But I can tell you now from experience and from witnessing seasons before, not with David Moyes in charge, we are very much in trouble, and we could very well go down, whether he's at the helm or not. And I just think it's odd timing from him, odd timing when, you want him to go be putting all of his efforts, Listen, everyone's entitled to it, and I don't want to be beating the old drum about, he shouldn't be doing this, he shouldn't be doing that. I know they're human beings, but things like podcasts and telling your story and telling everyone about, players that you've missed out on. When he was talking about signing Alvarez, by the way, they wanted £14 million for him. He was, he agreed that he was a good player. He just didn't think that he would go in over 33-year-old Mikel Antonio. Kid's about 20, 21, similar age to Skamaka. I think he's only 22, 23, isn't he? But he had doubts about whether he's going to play over Mikel Antonio. It just goes to show me that sort of thing, that he isn't looking at the long term, he's looking at the short term. He goes on to say that he wants to rebuild West Ham into a team of kids. All of our kids are leaving. These are things that do not paint him in a good light. It paints him in a way that he's deluded. He can't see the wood through the trees. If you can't sign a 20, look at how good that Alvarez is. We needed a striker at the time. We was pushing for 4th position. Does himself no favours. You want to win a trophy. You want to achieve things in the Premier League. You've got to take this cat. £40 million. He played £2 million less for Finn Downs, who he doesn't play. Even if you bought him and not played him, I think it's madness to. It's not just madness that he passed him up, but it's madness at this point in the season where we've scored 13 goals all season that he's admitting that. I think that's crazy. And what I think is even crazier is that West Ham have allowed this. Look, as I said before, I remember a couple of years ago, I had something set up with Manuel Lanzini, a FIFA event, and West Ham caught hold of the fact that we was arranged to possibly interview him, and pulled the plug on it and said no, he can't. They have final say over everything. If anyone at their football club, Declan Rice can't talk to us because of the club. If the club have final say on everything, for them to give the green light for this to go out today, PR disaster. I don't know what they're thinking. And once again, it comes down to, I think, just the lack of, I wouldn't say feeling, but a lack of understanding the fans' frustrations and a lack of understanding of how dire the situation actually is. You know, as I say, I don't want to be beating down, David Moyes, but to allow that to go out today when we're a few days away from a huge game, I think is PR disaster. You know, do that at the end of the season. I don't want our manager, when we're this far in trouble, taking, opportunities to do podcasts, because what they've talked about today, apart from them few little bombshells, that could have been done at the end of the season when he knows where he is. That could have been done, a year down the line, 6 months down the line. It's just one of them things where you've got to turn around. What is he gaining from it? I don't know, but it's one of them things where, just it makes sense to just turn around and go, do you know what, at the moment it's just not the right time. And when that interview went in the can, it could have been trimmed to, the content was, most of the content was evergreen. And it could have been something where West Ham looked at it and said, do you know what, great interview, we'll be happy to green like that, but let's get past the worst part of the season first. Let's see where David's going to be sitting in a couple of weeks' time. Crazy to be releasing that today. And I just don't think he's going to do himself any favours. It's all going on all around Twitter, all around social media, and I think they've shot themselves in the foot again. And they need to really, really, and this is a big criticism of the club, is that they don't seem to get the feel. They can't read the room when it comes to fans, and they've done this time and time again. And I think they really need to start pulling their head out their arses and have a good look of what's going on, because they're like that little dog sitting in the room with the fire going around him with the cup of tea, saying it's fine. That's exactly what they're like. They're like that meme at West Ham. They don't pull their head out their arses. They don't seem to be able to grasp the situation and how dire the situation is with the fans. They've got no connection to the fans, and they don't seem to be able to, in terms of social media, get anything right. And I thought it was improving. It's funny that we've had success over the last 2 years and nothing like this has come out. And then all of a sudden we're banging trouble and they're allowing things like this to go out. I think it's mental. But there you go. Let me know your thoughts on it. That was just my reaction. One thing left to say, come on, you ones.